That dilapidated shell is all that's left of the best damn garage in town, the immodest slogan of the late Smokey Yunick, irascible mechanical genius who in 1960 built the Daytona 500 Pontiac, on which Bobby Johns nearly won the race. And for good measure, he won the Indy 500 with driver Jim Rathman. Quite a guy. Well, in 61, Smokey was back at Daytona with a couple of more fast Pontiacs, but on qualifying day, the Mopar-mounted Petty family made all the headlines.
Folks say that lightning doesn't strike twice, but it did in 1961.
I went down on the flat to try to miss a wreck or miss something. I don't know. And when it did, then I lost complete control then. And the car went up, then it went over on the bank on the outside, and then it went down the hill, down the banking, which is, 6 stories high.
Remarkably, Petty suffered only minor injuries. He was being treated when the second qualifying race got underway.
And just as I came out of the infirmary, they said somebody had a wreck. Okay, and I looked around and they said, your dad just went through the fence up there.
Lee Petty, and ironically, with Johnny Beauchamp, who was so much a part of the 1959 controversy, they locked together going through the third and fourth turn and shot up the bank through the guardrail and landed outside the Speedway.
And by the time I get there, then they done cut the car apart, got him out of the car, and took off. And they was just trying to keep him alive. And they didn't set his legs, they didn't do anything. And once they got him then, in a couple of days, they got him stabilized and knew he was going to live. So then they started working on the broke parts and all that kind of stuff.
2 years after his win in the inaugural Daytona 500, Lee spent the next 4 months in the hospital, effectively ending his career. Son Richard, of course, would go on to become the most successful driver in 500 history. But the story of the 61 race became the guy who didn't even expect to be in it.
I did not have a ride for the 61 race. Smokey's Garage, there in Daytona, built Fireball, a new 61 Pontiac for the race. And the 60 Pontiac that he campaigned in 1960 was wrecked. And the mechanics in the shop said, Smoke, we should run that old car.
Yunick wasn't sold on a year-old car. Pontiac had loaded the 500 field with new, significantly faster 61 models. Fortunately for Panch, Smokey relented, rebuilt the year-old car, and hired Marvin to be Fireball's teammate.
From not having a ride to all of a sudden having a ride, you never forget that. And by that time, I was pretty hungry, too.
Race morning, Smokey surprised his drivers with some unusual instructions.
Smokey Yunick told Fireball and Marvin, he says, I want you to run at opposite ends of the track. If you're in turn 3, Fireball, he says, I want Marvin to be in 1. I don't want you guys running side by side.
I said, what are you talking about? He says, no, he says, if something happened to Fireball, I don't want you in the same accident.
So Fireball dominated the race with that new Pontiac, and about 10 laps to go, the starter fell off the car, fell off of Fireball's car, punched a hole in the oil pan, and Fireball was out. Now, some people say the engine blew.
Well, Smokey's not here to defend himself, so I'm not about to argue that the starter story was a ruse, that Fireball's Pontiac blew up. Regardless, the team's hopes suddenly rode with Panch in his year-old car.
So I had quite a few 61s to outrun. Pontiac had the field loaded with 61s, and they had the real good drivers in them. So that old 60 come flying up through there, ended up winning the race. Of course, Pontiac naturally was happy to have a Pontiac win, but they weren't that happy to see a 60 model win over a 61. But I was hungry, and no one held up a sign and say, take it easy, we'll pay you for it. So that's the way it ended up.
It was the second year in a row, that a Smokey Yunick car was involved in the finish, played an integral part in the story, and the second year in a row that a so-called underdog had went on to win the race.
It was a good feeling. And besides that, I knew I could eat some hot dogs, or maybe hamburgers that night instead of hot dogs. So, no, that was a good win for me. I needed it, and it came in at the right time.
For the record, Marvin's take that year was $21,050, a pittance compared to today's prize money, but sufficient in 1961 dollars to buy maybe even steak. His baseball pitching prowess earned Edward Glenn Roberts the nickname Fireball. But by age 18, Fireball was a racer and moving up. In 1955, he won his hometown race, the biggest of them all, on the sands of Daytona Beach. But the local boy makes good story fell apart. His car was disqualified after post-race inspection. Plagued with bad luck in the first 3 Daytona 500s, Fireball was the hungriest man in the garage area come February 1962.
To be the hometown hero that he was, to have lived in Daytona all those years, to have achieved the fame that he had never won the big one in Daytona.
In that 4th annual Daytona 500, Fireball's jinx ended spectacularly. He didn't just win, he blew them away, driving for the hometown team.
Fireball was the best car, and somewhere down in the race deal, he got away from everybody. He just run along by himself because he was so much faster.
It was a total Daytona effort. The car, the 62 Pontiac Catalina, the Smoky Unit built, Daytona's Smoky Unit. It was sponsored by Daytona's Jim Stevens, who was a local Pontiac dealer. It was driven by Daytona's Fireball Roberts, and the car won every single race that it was entered in. It won the qualifier, it won the pole, it won the 500. It was the monster.
Marvin Panch was back, seeking to become the first 2-time winner of the 500 in a Ford for some guys down from Virginia, the Wood brothers.
Marvin had already practiced in the car and qualified the car. So this guy came along and wanted Marvin to drive his sports car.
Briggs Cunningham had this Ford-powered Maserati, birdcage Maserati. He wanted us to go for enclosed world record for enclosed track. And being I was with Ford, I was the dummy, decided to drive it. And that's how I got into that situation.
With our qualified driver Marvin Panch injured in a flaming sports car crash, the Wood brothers needed a replacement for the 63 500. As fate would have it, one of the men who saved Marvin from his burning car was fellow driver Tiny Lund, who had come to Daytona in need of a ride.
I was burned pretty bad, and I was laid up in the hospital, and Glenn Wood came by, and he said, "What do you think if we put Tiny Lund in the car?"
He was a very competitive driver, quickest big man you've ever seen. Very quick reflexes, and a good driver. That's one of the reasons we wanted him in there.
As Lund and the rest of the field strapped in for the 5th annual 500, Hill reporter Chris Economaki revealed the key to the race.
Because of the high speeds turned in by these 1963 model cars, the gas consumption is higher than expected, and it may mean some of the star drivers will have to make an extra stop. It's normally a 4-stop race. Today, we may see some of the top stars making 5. This could be disastrous.
Fortunately, Lund had landed in the hands of master strategists. The Wood brothers gave him simple instructions. Draft. Keep number 21 in the slipstream and save fuel. Tiny did just that, and thus made one less pit stop than his rivals. And when he did stop, it was quick.
Wood brothers practiced field stops. Really did. They were the first ones that were professional pit crew people.
Tiny Lund doing a great job at car number 21, because he's the leader. He inherited the lead when Lorenzo and Jarrett stopped, and he's trying to hang on to it now with the pit stop, getting close to the half-minute mark, and away he goes.
They made real quick pit stops, and they had enough fuel to make the last few laps. Tiny didn't have to make the extra stop, so it was natural. It was perfect.
One more key to those quick stops, unbelievable by today's standards. Thanks to ingenious setup, the Wood brothers never changed a tire. Lund ran the entire 500 miles on one set, and they carried him all the way to victory lane.
Tiny have just won $25,000. What will you folks do with it? Pay your bill.
Lund's bill-paying feat was striking. Like Marvin Panch in '61, Tiny came to Daytona without a ride and went home the winner of the year's biggest race.